With Jan. She's like our little big boss. And Deborah Francis here from, you're one of the regional directors, correct? And so they're here to answer all your burning questions. Do you have a thing?
No, we are here we are on the hot seat. You guys just ask what you have to ask, and we will do our best to answer your questions. All right.
I have a question in regards to the student-teacher ratio and whether that is something that is given to a full district or if it's based on a case of, like one specific school or how that works.
That's a great question. It is a staffing ratio for the district. So when I was teaching in high school, I had a caseload of about 175 because the kindergarten teachers had to have 10. Okay? Of course, mine didn't stay with me but an hour. The kindergarten teacher got to keep hers all day long. So, I mean, it is a district ratio and it is a full-time equivalent ratio. So if you have a 1 to 50, you don't have to hire an entire extra teacher if you can find a part-time teacher. But very often it's easier to just go ahead and hire a full-time teacher rather than a part-time teacher. Sometimes we have the question is, we don't have the funds. We're at 1 to 35 and we don't have the funds to pay for another teacher. But keep in mind that your basic education plan, state funding, our English learners generate several $1 million of funding from the BEP, or the Basic Education Plan funding, and it's staffed at 1 to 20. So you're being funded at 1 to 20. So if you look at state board policy, you have to meet that requirement and assure that the students are getting the services they need. So if the students are not getting what they need at 1 to 35, you're going to have to go lower. And we do have some districts that are way down in the teens. We have one district I remember expressly has like 1 to 17 because there was a lot of travel within that district and that was the only way they could get all the services to the children. So, did that answer what you needed?
It did, I think, because, Wilson County, we're struggling right now with our numbers, and the way the county is, it's not distributed evenly. So you have some teachers who have a lot of travel time, they run multiple schools, but they don't have very many kids. Then we have these large schools where you have a huge caseload, and it's like you can't meet the time frame for each of these kids in a day and give them the service that is required to give them. So it's very challenging.
If Katie and I were coming to monitor your district and we saw that the kids were getting 30 minutes a day instead of an hour, your district would be out of compliance. So you need to be seeking, not you particularly, but your district needs to be seeking a remedy for that so that every child can get what is required for them in state board policy.
Can I bring up one more thing with that?
Yes, ma'am.
So, in the past it's been brought up how sometimes the special education can, meet the needs of ELL learners, and I think that's something that's become abused over the years. Is that something that, can you specify is there a clear line with that?
There's a pretty clear line if the Office of the Department of Justice walks in or the Office of Civil Rights walks in. We are supposed to coordinate services. Now, clearly, if we have a child that has significant disabilities, especially significant cognitive disabilities, the IEP team needs to decide how that child will be handled, how their courses will be scheduled. If ESL is something that will support that child and help that child, then they should have those services. If the child is nonverbal and ESL will not really support them, then ESL is not a viable place for that child. But we can't say, so he's out of ESL, no ESL ever, because perhaps that child will progress, we hope, and will be able to come back. One of the places that's happened is with cochlear implants. Many of those children used to not be in ESL services, and now with the cochlear implants, that's a good placement for them. So the federal government expects all of us to coordinate services, not deny any child any service that will benefit them. That's a great question. Thank you.
Would you suggest the IP team to keep meeting until everyone agrees?
I would suggest that there has to be a process for agreement in place. You know, it shouldn't be where.
Because we feel like we're arguing over the child because he needs ESL.
And maybe
also
it's
needs-
not the entire IEP team. Maybe it's a core set of that needs to sit down and hash this out. Because you really don't want to have parents hearing you argue over their child. You
Right.
need to have that discussion. Probably privately make some decisions where the school standing is one front. But it shouldn't be an arbitrary. I know when we started this, there were times when I felt like, you know, I'm in the IEP team and I've got a group of general ed teachers and several special education teachers and one ESL teacher, and you feel mighty small sometimes. So you have to really, you know, take that on and embrace it.
Jane, if I could just kind of
Sure,
jump
go,
in for a
please
second,
do.
because we have had, of course, similar concerns in our district, and we wanted to make a standard operating procedure in order to help everybody kind of come together for this. So we have a couple of forms that we've developed, and basically it is to help that ESL, to give that ESL teacher a voice. So you have an ESL, RTI, and SPED coordinated services form. And two very important pieces of information are brought to these meetings. Number one, how long has the child been in a U.S. school? And secondly, what are those past couple of years WIDA scores? So this kind of gives you, number one, you know, the more you communicate out what this process is, because when we first started SPED, we had to get SPED on board. It's like, okay, we're working as a team, so how do we come together so that you know what we're going to bring to the table, and we know what the expectations are at that IEP team meeting. So this has really helped just by the fact that we're communicating this out as a district and saying, you know, when you have your RTI meetings, when you have your SPED team meetings, we need to be at the table, and we need to have to be able to bring that information so that those very important decisions can be made. And it kind of cuts out on the back and forth too, you know, it's just like, hey, here, we're supposed to be here, we're supposed to be sharing this.
And I'm sure Deborah would be happy to share that with you. Deborah isn't, if you don't know her, she is in Memphis, in Shelby County, bigger than Memphis, and she does a lot of innovative work. And if you need those forms, if you'll reach out to me or to Deborah, you can share those.
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
Deborah, what's your last name? Sorry.
France, Frantz.
You want to take Becky's question?
Mine's really kind of related to that one, and just an example of what if a kid is on the other end of the spectrum where they're orally fluent but they've been diagnosed with dyslexia, or that's what with full support from ESL teacher. Is that a kid that you would, you know, that they need, that the special ed reading services is better for them? Should they still, what would your recommendation be on that one?
You want to take it or you want me to?
You can take it.
We're actually looking at that at our stakeholders meeting next week, because right now we really don't have a way to exit those kids, and we need to begin looking at that. Federal law is going to allow us now to exit alt access children, but those children that you're talking about are not alt access children. They
What
just
they're
have,
doing is putting
they
them
just,
on.
yeah. So we are looking at if that child could not take the reading portion, or could not take the reading portion with accommodations, and that was a missing domain to their test, then we are looking at a way to figure a composite score so that we could have exit criteria for them. We don't know if that will be approved by stakeholders. If it is, we'll be taking it to state board in October. If it's not, it'll probably be yet another year before we can get to that.
But with services, is it okay to put them on consultation at that point with the ESL teacher's approval, or is that to have
If
them
you
that you're
really feel like,
consulting with
if you
the
really
special ed?
have documentation
Okay.
that ESL is not supporting them, but reading is only one piece of ESL.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't do that unless I had really strong scores in speaking, listening, and writing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's one we keep coming up with.
Sure.
I have a newcomer question. So, I guess is that okay, or should we like, you know, just like I don't know what to do when that situation happens. Like, am I the person that should be in charge of advocating for the child, or is the general ed teacher the one I should like adhere to and say, okay, you know what I mean? It's a very tricky thing because like it happens to me all the time, and I'll have some teachers that are very open about it and very like, well, yeah, let's make sure that the child understands and just do, you know, very differentiated assignments, and then I'll have other teachers will be like, well, they can't do it, so they get a 0.
Well, I'm going to share with you what was shared with me when I was in a classroom teaching, and I was at federal meetings and had the opportunity to hear the Office of Civil Rights talk about this issue and how to handle it. You need a plan to modify the grading and accommodate the instruction of that child. And to modify that grading, you can't do it after the fact. So in my grade book, in my planner, we had an agreement that if my newcomer got 10% of the questions right this week, they had an A. And if they got, 5%, they had a C. And if they tried, they had a D. Just if they tried. And then that changes through the year as they gain skill. Your gen ed teachers need to also have a plan for that, because it's not equitable to put a child who's got a 400-word vocabulary into a history class and expect that they know anything that's going on. So you need to help that teacher understand. You need to agree with us right now that you need to agree with the child and have an agreement with the child, and I always tried to include parents. I was a secondary teacher, but I still tried to include parents. Let them know this is how we're doing this, and this is what will happen. Now, make sure the child understands they're not going to get by with that forever. But most of them don't want to. They want to be doing the work that the other children are doing. Yeah.
And this would be a good place also when thinking about individual learning plans and how you can draft up whether it's an accommodations page or other additional sections, especially for different courses that they're in, where you might be able to have that agreement drawn up. And some districts even make teachers sign it so that they have something that shows that the teachers have seen these are the accommodations, and I've signed off that I will do these. And then having that collaboration time when working through the ILP might be a good space to interface with those general ed teachers and go over that more regularly.
In general, sometimes they don't understand that they, I guess that they are entitled to modifications. I think a lot of them generally really feel that, okay, they should be able to do it. If they can't, they get a 0.
So I think also that the WIDA trainings that are coming down will also assist with this, because I know what is happening with in our population is our teachers are now being asked to provide a grade within ESL, and this is something that we move forward with specifically because we felt like who better to be able to explain to the gen ed teacher about grading unless you're experiencing that yourself, and you have to kind of explain, well, here's how we can do it. But there are definitely a lot of questions in the area about grading, but I feel certain that through continued collaboration with ILP, and we have right now a team of teachers who are collecting work and providing samples so that we can go back and say, okay, look at this particular work, where were the particular modifications made, and how would you grade it? Because to me, if I'm in the classroom, I want specific examples so I can show also my gen ed teacher. So that's another thought, kind of get together and share those samples with one another.
We had a question here.
No, it's following up on that, like if there's something in writing, because I understand what you're saying and we can advocate for the students, but that Main Street classroom, who perhaps, I don't know what she believes and wants or doesn't, is not as welcoming to the foreign population. And
Well, there is something in writing. Age-appropriate placement. We
yes,
can't fail
and
in retention
guidelines.
guidelines.
But they're in, I don't know, a computer class, let's say. Well, little Roger, no, we're doing this and he can't do it. Well, obviously he's never had a computer. Where are you modifying for that student? Well, they can't do it, they got an F. So where do we go? And we can say, you can't do that, let's help. No, but they didn't do it, it's an F. So
To the
if it's in
retention
writing,
guidelines on the website.
and I have the manual, and I pulled it up, but it's retention, so I removed retention and I put kind of grading in my mind to see if we could get the
Yes,
word across.
you could.
and see if we can go that way, but, you know, that 10%, that's an A. 5%, that's a C. If it was clear, like
Right.
it is written there, perhaps that will help.
That would help.
Because we can advocate all day long,
But if there's not.
but who's gonna listen to us?
If
We're
the
that one
criteria,
or 5
yeah.
people going for that kid, but you have a whole school of over, I don't know, 3,000
Yeah.
students,
Yeah.
and you're just a.
What
If we
about
had a specific
local
criteria
policy?
that was in writing that we could give to our teachers and say, this is what we should be doing, this is the scale.
So something to consider, is it in your local policy, is it in your, you know, because it is, the language support plan we've had for years, we haven't used the term individualized learning plan, and for us, I mean, admittedly, it has been something that has been more solitary than collaboratively used, okay? So now that it is more definitively defined through the state that it has to be a collaborative effort, we're going back and we're revising local policy to make sure that it's in there when it comes to grading, that the teachers must be a part of that process and must know, you know, exactly what those children's needs are. So I mean, you have to give it some bite, you know. So local policy might be an option.
So do you have one for your school that you can share and we can model? I mean, obviously
Yeah.
it cannot be yours,
It's
but.
no, truthfully, it is in draft form right now, and we have another meeting coming up next week. But just the fact that we've been working on this, but as soon as it's posted and out, I mean, it's there for everybody to see. It would be.
So could we email you?
Sure,
and
sure, and I'll
ask
connect
so
you with
that
Deborah.
perhaps everybody who needs can create one for their
Sure.
district and it would fit their population.
Sure, and it may be that, we checked with some of the other regional advisors, they may have one in place now. Kim, do you have one in place?
Not specifically.
Not
about
specifically, okay.
grading, no.
I was gonna say that, in our district, my ESL teachers present an ESL 101 in every building, and sometimes at that meeting, we have a modification accommodations forms that we've created, and the ESL teachers have already checked off on it, what modifications and accommodations are appropriate for that specific student, and the ESL teacher has to sign it, the general ed teacher has to sign it, and the principal. So they can't come back and say, I didn't know we're supposed to modify, I don't know how to modify. And so, we put that in their ESL file, so if the teacher ever comes back and says, I didn't know how to modify, remember we went over this form and he signed it, you know, on this date, so.
That's a good way to handle it also, yes.
Okay, so let's say, oh, I didn't know, I have to modify, but it's on the IOP, all this stuff that needs to be checked. And then they say that, who's the police to go, not after that teacher, but who's going to say, well, you didn't do it, and you need to do this? Who's responsible for that?
Well, I think if she's getting it signed by a principal, the principal would be in the supervisory role that would be responsible.
I mean, I think you should go and speak to them first, and you know, be like, you know, we've already talked about this, but then if you find that it's still not happening, the principal.
Yeah. And you will need support from your building level administrators to get any of this to be successful.
But it's hard when you're not in that building and you travel, and
I
you
know.
might be tight with the secretary, and some principals you're good with, but then there's some that you're not, you're still the outsider. And even when you go to these IEPs, sorry, and it's like, okay, we're fighting for the same purpose. We are all going, that is our goal. Why are we doing this against each other?
I can't promise you anything in writing because we're about to start some major work with monitoring, but you know, it's something we'll continue to look at. I'm not sure we could get it approved because we're a local controlled state. So we try to leave as much of the responsibility with the districts and not all with us. We took on a lot this year, taking on what we did in state board policy. So I'm not sure I can promise you something in writing, but I can help you connect with people who can show you some examples.
We love it. Thank you.
I promise that.
You want to call?
Sure, go ahead.
I was just wondering if you all are ever going to develop like an ESL rubric for evaluation purposes.
Actually, we have a meeting for teacher evaluation.
Uh-huh.
We have a meeting about that on Thursday. So we are working on it currently. Yeah. So yeah.
For this year or probably next year?
Probably next year. Yeah. I think it'll be at least next year.
Yeah,
but
thinking about more ESL, EL specific observation guidance.
And in the meetings we've been in prior to the next meetings, there's been a lot of talk. We want you to be sure and advocate for yourself and take advantage of those pre-visit interviews and making sure that your administrators know that an ESL class doesn't look like a history class. It's busy, it's noisy, and that's the goal, to have a lot of communication going on. So make sure that you've done that part too. But yes, we are working on a rubric.
So I know you're going to be in schools monitoring, and our ILPs are new to us as a district. And we've taken on work within Rutherford County from an ESL teacher perspective and trying to build in collaboration with classroom teachers over the course of this year. I have heard that it's 4.5 weeks. We're supposed to rotate out and change goals. Is that what the state is actually hoping for?
It's not what I'm hoping for.
Okay.
I'll tell you what I'm hoping for. I used ILPs when I was teaching. And our beginners and our lowest students, 4.5 weeks is an eternity, especially when you're in a situation where you feel like you're failing. So I think our beginners need to have goals updated every week, even more frequently if possible. But keep in mind, this is not like an IEP update. This is not one where you have to dig through data and where you have to have big meetings and where you have to do all that. If you set a goal that this week you're going to start every sentence you write, or you're going to learn to write your capital letters, and they meet it at the end of the week, give them a star and say, look, you've done it. It's complete. Next week, let's work on this. That's all. That's all that update takes of goals. That's all that's required. It's not anything, where you're going to sit down and write goals for this semester, this 6 weeks, write your goals short enough term that your kids can experience success. And maybe your more advanced kids, 4.5 weeks is good. But I taught in high school, and I found that 4.5 weeks is a long time for a 16-year-old too. And if I had shorter goals that they could meet and get a star, put a little gold star or something put on their chart, or just, any little thing, it was motivational. And the part of the ILP, there are two things we want, or we hope for. One is collaboration, the other is motivation. So those are the two things to keep in mind. The attorneys said I needed to put an absolute minimum. And so we chose 4.5 weeks because that's when you're updating RTI data. But if you do it next week with one child, you update her goals, you've got 4.5 more weeks before you have to do anything. You don't have to stay on a mid-grading period cycle.
So one of the things that makes that a challenge for us is our licensure and being able to manipulate our online database for updating those ILPs. Not all of our teachers in our district have access to go in and change those once they've been entered. Can they be done pencil paper? I mean, how?
Sure.
Sure. That's more realistic because I have a team of 5 teachers who are working with students, and the burden lies on me that I'm the only one with the license in there to pull that teacher in, that classroom teacher in, to collaborate with
Absolutely.
time.
Do whatever you need to do, and if you have paper copies, I always sent those home with my students at the end of the year or the end of a semester to say, look how much you've accomplished. And that was something they could share with parents.
So to continue on the ILP topic, so if they were to be updated every week, is the expectation then that there's our classroom teacher signing off on that as well?
Not necessarily. It's however you set it up.
Okay. And
So
then,
it could be either or both, or,
what would be, I understand that purpose is like to get collaboration, everyone that's working with that child, to hold everyone accountable as far as the child's progress. But what would be required as far as monitoring purposes? For example, I have to drive out to one school for a child that's on a waiver to get a teacher to sign off on goals that I'm not doing, but I'm hoping the classroom teacher does, but I don't know and so that's 20 miles round trip. So in order for me to do that, there's an hourly student or more not getting services at that time for me to run out and have that teacher sign.
you could do it. You could email them back and forth. If you have a secure email.
If I email and they respond, then that's
Yeah,
considered
that's
a
good enough.
response, that's good.
That's enough. Yeah. Yeah, we would much rather have you teaching students than driving around.
Well,
And you
with
would
7
too.
schools, that's
Yes, that's a
sort of
challenge.
the reality. Okay.
That's a challenge.
I have a question about service times. The service time is flexible for children. Is it over 3.4 or including 3.4?
No, it's over 3.
Over 3.4. Who makes the decision about what the service times look like for a student? I know it's a student by student basis. We get to know our kids. We know some of them may still need an hour, and we give them an hour. But if we hear recommendations that say we need to bring it to an RTI meeting and decide as a team, and I'm not saying we should not discuss with classroom teachers or we should not discuss with administration or anything like that, but do we need to do it in a formal way in the way that RTI is done, or can it be done in a more informal way where we have, you know, one-on-one conferences with classroom teachers, one-on-one conversations with admin? Does that make sense?
First, let me say RTI and ESL are 2 separate programs. So there's not a choice of they need more RTI time, so we're going to take some of their ESL time, or they need they need less ESL time, so we're going to give it to RTI. That's not a viable choice. They're 2 totally separate programs. So whatever is required, RTI is a state initiative, and I believe in it. It's working well in many places. ESL is a federal initiative. Federal initiatives generally have a little bit more clout. There's funding tied to it. There's civil rights tied to it. The Department of Justice can walk into any building anywhere and start an investigation over civil rights if there's cause or complaint. So ESL is not a choice. It's a service that has to be there, 100%. Now, I believe in collaboration, and the more you can collaborate with the RTI team, the better service the child's going to get, and the happier you'll all be. But be very careful that if that child is a beginner or a low intermediate, you are violating his or her rights if they cannot access what's taught and being worked on in RTI. So RTI and ESL for beginning students is a little bit at odds with each other, because for ESL, we're just happy when they communicate. They come up and give me a sentence and there's not a word right in it, but I understand what they're saying.
You heard their voice.
Absolutely. I heard their voice and I'm excited. RTI is working on very specific skills. Generally, our kids are not ready for specific skill work until they're about a level 3. Okay? So you may need to talk with your RTI team about other ways to gather data and what we need to do, and make sure that they understand anything that's taught in RTI, those children need to be able to access with their current language ability.
And I have kind of a follow-up to that. So hypothetically, I have 2 students with over a 4.0 composite, and really what held them in is writing, which is common for a kid who's been in, 4 years. And I would like to reduce that child's service time to 30 minutes,
Sure.
so that they have access to math intervention,
Sure.
or some other enrichment process. And I discussed that maybe with admin or something. They said, well, you will have to bring that to an RTI meeting. That's not your decision. What?
RTI runs differently in each district. Deborah, how would you respond to that if she were coming to you?
I would say,
And I do want to say I've taught in a few different schools in my district, and this is the only school that has responded to me that way.
Okay.
It's definitely not a district-wide response.
Policy, yeah.
No, ma'am.
generally, I would ask that you refer that to the ESL department, because if you need some support in that manner, because if for us, we don't have a standardized way of determining, although it's come up in terms of, well, how are those children 3, 5, and above? Who determines that? And right now, it's all, well, it's tailored service. It's in the best need of the child. We are trusting you to make those decisions at the school, the school level. But I would kind of ask you to refer that to your department, so that if you needed that support, you could gain that, and maybe they could communicate that with the school leadership.
Okay.
So you don't have to take that on by yourself.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm kind of piggybacking off of that. What about your students who been in ESL for a while and are still at that below 3.4 level, not necessarily beginner, but an intermediate below, and you see that from the RTI they received, their reading scores actually grew. So really the RTI seems to be helping them more than ESL at this point, because they've been in for so long. We're not meeting their needs. It's not necessarily a language acquisition issue anymore.
Well, but why wouldn't they have the opportunity to participate in both?
They do,
So,
but what about time? That's what I'm wondering.
Well, I know that at least from like an OCR perspective, like time is not anything that they consider to be like a explanation for cutting back on service time. So
I can give you an example of how we're handling things because we've had to think through a lot, of course, like everybody else does. So what we worked out, and we began this push last year with RTI and whole collaboration, because we found that generally speaking, at times blanket decisions were being made. Either all the ESL kids were either going in, or so we needed to be more individual. What we ended up doing is, of course, for those kids who qualify for the 1 to 3.4, they have their ESL code and they're coded in there. And then when it comes to RTI versus ELD, I realize we're kind of on different terms because our district uses the term ESL for that first touch, okay? So that's your mandated hour, ESL. And then after that, if you have a newcomer or a student who's been in the country 1 or 2 years, and their WIDA score is within that 1 to 3.4, then when it comes time for RTI period, we go back to that form and we say, what is in the best interest of this child? Are they at a point now where they can access RTI and it's meaningful to them, or should they come back and have a second touch with ELD? And that second touch does not have to be the hour. So that's kind of how we're handling that in terms of they still get their ESL, but then it's like, okay, now does there need to be a second touch, or is it more time for them to go down the RTI path?
And how are you getting that time with all the other mandated things is what I'm wanting to know, because
We are pulling out of we pull out of ELA, or push into ELA.
or usually you have a district that says no, we're not doing that.
How about pushing into other subjects? I'm pushing into
Science,
science or
social
social studies. That's district. I mean,
Our hands are tied by what we are given at the,
What about pulling them out of during the ELA block, a portion of it, and incorporating some of the skills that are in the classroom for your lessons?
Oh, I would love to do that, but I don't have the ability to be
I just would talk about this, like our school, basically said that they are ESL child, they're not going to get RTI at all. And our scheduled time was made by our principal, and so ESL is during their RTI time.
That is how ours is.
That is how ours is. And so there's not even that option.
Right.
But what we have done in that situation is, it's a pie, you're gonna miss something. But we will pull those children during a different, so for example, for 3rd grade, we only have 8 3rd graders during 3rd grade time. But during 2nd grade time, we have 9 3rd graders. Because all of those kids have, it's tier 2 or tier 3. And it's not normally that many out of a grade level, but those particular kids it just happened that way. But, so they're coming at a different time, but then they're missing stuff. Their teachers had to agree for them to miss a little bit.
Our principal's like, well, you can't pull from ELA, you can't pull from math, you can't pull from
So I think when we've talked to Jan about this specifically about, again, it's district, and we realize some of your districts say, you can't miss this portion of ELA, or for K through 5, for example, with our K2 block, it's 120 minutes. So if you're pulling out for the hour, then they're missing part of that. But we've aligned our ELA and ESL curriculum. So we are tackling those same objectives, just like the state is asking us. You have to address those ELA and WIDA standards. So they're not missing anything, but that goes back to collaboration. If I'm pulling out of your class, what is it? What portion of that instruction are they missing, and what am I now accountable for? So all that, it's a conversation, definitely.
Well, my problem is it's been given to the principals to make that decision, and I have no say-so in that. And some principals are doing exactly what you're saying, but others won't, and it's toss of a hat.
Did you talk about our textbook adoption?
No.
Okay.
We're still discussing RTI.
RTI, okay, we're still on RTI.
I know they want to have like a lot of local power, and I believe in that, but I do feel like we have so many different things that need policies right now that I think districts are like sometimes dropping the ball on things just because there's so much.
Well, let me talk a little bit about policy.
Okay.
The minute Katie and I put something in state board policy, your district is limited with their funding. They cannot pay for anything regarded to ILPs with federal funds, Title I or Title III or any other title money. They can't pay for WIDA training for gen ed teachers out of Title I or Title III because it's in state board policy, and it's considered supplanting if it's not supplemental, and it's not supplemental if it's required in state board. So it's a money issue, okay? And I can put a lot of things in state board policy, but everything I put in there narrows what your district can do with their funds down. So what the suggestion from Washington has been, and I think it's a good suggestion, is to ask districts to write procedures. And if you've heard me many times this last year, I've said you need a procedure for reclassification. You need a procedure for how you handle certain situations that occur frequently or occur, a few times a year. You need procedures in place. And when Katie and I come to monitor you, we're going to say, hey, Becky, where's your procedure for reclassification? Where's your procedure for a child that needs fewer hours? How do you make that determination? If you started the year with 5 hours a week and you are feeling differently, what made that determination? What's your proof? And if you have a procedure and you follow that every time with every child from every language group, you're not going to commit an OCR violation. But if you don't have it written, then Ahmed could say, you treated me different from what you treated Jose. And how do you prove it? And the first thing the Department of Justice or the Office of Civil Rights will ask is, where's your procedure?
What if some teachers follow the procedures and other teachers don't follow the procedures?
They can go, their OCR lawsuits can go against teachers, can go against districts, can go against schools, can go against the state. So those teachers need to understand if you have a procedure, and if your district has a procedure, and I think Kim and Deborah would agree with me, if there are teachers that don't like that procedure, you need to inform the Title III people so that they can inform that teacher that this is not this is not an option. This is something the district has decided you work for the district, and part of your job as a district employee is to protect the district. So.
Can I just clarify? So if that procedure that we all write and agree on, and the person that's not following that procedure is the principal, to handle your pickle, that it's not really teachers, it's some principals in cases are not allowing us to do that, or mandating that our ESL time be during RTI. Would that that's where our principals are. That's what I've heard all of y'all saying, is that principals are telling us that that's our time, and then when we're only there half the day, how are we getting these kids served? We're not.
I would escalate that to the Title III director right away and that's why they make all this money, is where they can handle situations like that. But escalate it to them. If it's a situation that comes to the state, I'll be very open with you about what will happen. I would probably contact the school or contact the Title III person in that district, and then maybe we would contact the school together and say, we've had these complaints and we want to straighten them out. If that doesn't help, the lady that you might have heard yesterday, Rachel Supay, and I work very closely on those issues. because you know it's not my civil rights, it's not your civil rights, it's the child's civil rights. And we know in an English-only state, if we don't teach them English, they are not going to have the keys they need to be successful in school. No option. So, you know, I don't want you know, teachers to ever feel like if they tell me something and I follow up on it, I would say to you, you've given me this and here are my options. We can drop it, and you can let the parents know they can write a complaint. You can write a complaint, or you can talk to people and see if you can straighten it out. If you want me to handle it, I'll be moving forward with it.
I heard you mention ELD, and I've never heard that term. That's okay. So that's when you look at the state codes, they're all termed ELD. For our district, we kind of had already pushed the year before to make that differentiation between RTI and the second touch with ESL. We gave it that term ELD. So I didn't go backwards. In other words, I didn't want to confuse, because we had spent a whole year trying to make that separate pathway accessible if needed. So in other words, so we simply just term our ESL courses ESL, and then if the child needs, when the decision comes to if they need RTI versus a second touch of ESL, we term that ELD, English Language Development. And that's all. It's just a second touch of ESL.
So is that a state mandated?
It's not state mandated, but we were asked to clean up our language a little bit. And so instead of having ESL standards, we have ELD standards, English Language Development Standards. So we're trying to make that the same across, and then as we wrote new course codes, we put ELD in that because that aligns with the standards. So a lot of places, like California, have never used ESL classes. They've used ELD classes. And obviously the big 5 states get to push us little guys around a little bit. But that's okay. We're doing better than they are on a lot of fronts.
Did I hear you earlier mention something about textbooks?
Yes. Yeah, I put my foot right in my mouth, didn't I? Yeah, we have made a commitment that the proper place for ESL is through English Language Arts. It always has been. It's always been the request of the Department of Justice and the Office of Civil Rights. And so our textbook adoption for next year, there will be no ESL textbooks. There will be English Language Arts textbooks that have ancillary materials that support English learners. So your standards will be basically built through ELA standards. Your WIDA standards will be applied on top of ELA standards. And most of you will follow the curriculum that all gen ed kids at that grade level are getting. Now your newcomers may be a little bit of you may have to finagle a little bit there.
Will all the textbooks that are available to be adopted have that ESL component?
Only the ELA, yes. The ELA textbooks will.
Okay, that's
Yeah. We're hoping for it, and it's a plus if they have that ESL component or ELD component for science, math, social studies, but it's going to be required in ELA.
Does that mean we won't have like the content based as an option anymore for like ESL? So right now we have it where you might even have like the biology with the certified teacher or
Sheltered, no, you can still do that. You can still do sheltered. Yeah, sheltered is a program design, and you can certainly use that. And any of you that are having trouble with your program designs, if you can catch Katie and I in the office, we'd love to help you with them, because there's a lot of difference between a sheltered class in this county and that county and this district and that district. So if you're having difficulty with sheltered programs, or you're having difficulty with some of your programming issues, we would be happy to talk about that. We could even set up some conference calls where we could do this on a conference line. And we both work a little late sometimes, so we wouldn't even mind doing it after you're off school. We just don't want to take all your time and set things up at 4 o'clock. Any other questions for us? Yeah?
have one about the read aloud for social studies.
Uh-huh.
The state testing, will it be, I think it kind of goes back and forth a little bit. I was wondering if this year they will be doing that, will be reading.
Megan Sellers is Lori Nixon is no longer with the state. She got her doctorate and she's teaching at Austin Peay. And the new person for that position is Megan Sellers, and it's SELLERS, MEGAN.SELLERS at TN.gov. Megan is the appropriate person for you to ask. Joanne and I had a bit of panic if you watched us yesterday. Hopefully you weren't watching us, you were looking at the speakers. But we had a piece of paper come across that talked about Nextera. I don't know what a Nextera is, but some of you do because you deal with assessment. But all of these accommodations have to be in Nextera for read alouds. The way it looked to me, of course, I'm always watching my pot that boils. I'm never as concerned about the other pieces, but it looked to me as if English learners could be kind of left out of this if ESL teachers and Title III directors don't know that they have to sign up for that accommodation way before the test. So it is an accommodation that's allowable, but you need to sign up for it. And you'll probably, your Title III and I can't send things to district testing coordinators, but I can send them to Title III people. And then you might want to share that if you're a Title III person and get that with your district testing coordinator, that we need to put that in place.
Thank you.
She was next, and then
sorry, kind of going along with that, is that kind of like the same thing that we need to do like last year for the ACT? Like it had to be approved prior?
Yes,
is that
yes,
kind of what you're
yes,
okay.
exactly.
Because it had to go through our testing
Exactly.
coordinator, get it approved, and plenty of time
Yes,
before they can have
yes,
those accommodations.
yes. It is, and plan everything ahead of time.
The testing coordinators have meetings all next week, so
Okay.
they will get information about
Good.
that. But it doesn't sound like it's much different than what it has been.
Okay, well that may be good. I just didn't see it last year and have time to panic. All right. Any other questions?
I have one.
All right.
So the 3.5 or below 3.5, is that in each domain? Is that in overall? Is that in literacy? What?
It's the composite.
Okay.
But there is some guidance in the new state board policy. So read that state board policy carefully, and if you have questions, reach out to us. The state board policy was approved on July 27th. If you go to the State Board of Education website, the new policy is there. It was sent to Title III directors, but if they didn't share it with you or you don't have it. Don't just go to state board policy and put in ESL policy, because you'll get everything from 2001 forward. So you want not only 2018, but the one that was approved July 27th in 2018. And we are going to stop putting exit criteria into the manual, because we can do the manual once or twice a year, and our policy's changing quicker than that. So what we're going to have in the manual is something that says, see current state board policy approved and the date. So that's a change. No, thank you for bringing that up.
Is it 3.5 or
3.207. 3.2.
Oh, the
policy.
Yeah.
3.4 and below is an hour a day, 5 days a week. 3.5 and above, it's tailored services.
Okay.
We did that because with the new test, we don't get a 3.4 on the new screener. So if you had a child score at 3.3 or 3.4, we don't know what that is. So we would have to either go back to 3.0 or go to 3.5. So that was why we did that.
I have more.
All right.
Speaking of the service times and the testing, with the kindergarten WAPT test, will that be revamped ever?
Yes. And I'll tell you why it's not revamped.
Because that's getting so many of our kids qualified, the majority qualify with that particular screener.
Well, and it's better for them to qualify and not need service and test out at the end of the year than it is for them to get out at the beginning and have needed service all year and end of the year a year behind. So we have our kindergarten scores set kind of high because we want to make sure we capture those kids. If you're ever in a situation, and please don't tell people that are going to tell you go do this to get rid of some kids because you don't have enough space, but if you have a situation where a child tested badly, a screener's a bad test. Okay? It's a bad test because the kids aren't happy, they don't know you yet, you're throwing English questions at them, they're scared to death. But if you have a child that tests into ESL and 2 weeks into the year, you determine this kid doesn't need ESL, this kid's really fluent. Work with that and work with us, and we'll be happy to talk with you, gather some data points, and then let you move them out of that 5 days a week, an hour a day, into something that's more reasonable. We just need some data to support us and to support you. Okay. So even though that's in state board policy, we can override it, but we need some information.
Okay, yeah, I really didn't mean they were all qualified with that particular assessment. Yeah. But, you know, sometimes the kindergarten teacher might come and say, oh, well, you know, they didn't qualify, but, you know, they don't even know the letters or sounds. Is there any way that that particular test is going to be redone or, you know?
The test will be redone when there's federal money to redo it. Okay? And that's why it didn't get redone. The WIDA screener that was redone, that was 1 through 12, the federal government said you can build a test for 1 through 12. So they built a test for 1 through 12 and said, what about our kindergartners? And they said, there's no money for that. So until they come out with a grant where they can, you know, have some funds to do this with, they are not going to do that. But there are the 2 big ESL testing places are both complaining to the federal government that our K tests are not right. And of course, USAID doesn't want that to go any further. So I think it'll be done in a year or so. Yeah.
So a 3.4 in composite, but what if they got like a 2.8 in writing?
Look at that state board policy and see if that clarifies it for you. Yeah. If I had time, I'd pull it up now, but I don't think we've got time. Yeah.
If a kid was given a screener and test out, he's out. 2 years later, he moves back to his home country. And then a year later, oh no, well, whatever, he was here for 1 year, moves out for 2 years, and then comes back. He was already assessed and qualified, but now has been to whatever country, comes back. Do you reassess? Do you not?
You have to make a decision. You need a procedure.
A procedure.
As your district, the same old song, second verse. You need a procedure on how you would handle that. And if you decide if a child's been in a foreign country for a year or 2 years, they need to be rescreened, you can follow that. Just treat every child the same. Home language survey is supposed to be done 1 time. So if you have to do it again, you know, maybe this child left, maybe they lived here until they were 6 years old, and then they went to Honduras and lived there for 5 years.
Right.
So they had English in the first one, but now they're more fluent in Spanish.
Right.
Then staple your new home language survey to your old one and write duplicate because, and put a reason on there. Child took formative years of education in Honduras, and that way you have a justification.
Yeah.
OCR is not mean. They're just looking out for the kids. And if I find something, if I'm monitoring you and I find an issue, what Katie and I will ask you to do is start work on it. Because if some parent complains between the time we monitor and the time something could happen, when OCR calls, I want to be able to say, and Katie wants to be able to say, yes, we knew that Acme County had an issue here, and this is what we've done, and this is what they've done. And then we have an agreement we can work with. But if I say, nope, didn't know that.
The way it has been brought up is once they test it out, they're out and that's it. And I'm thinking, this kid was out for like 3 years, in these critical years. And
I'll tell you what I'm thinking.
Said, he's not able to keep up. And it's like, okay, exhibit A.
That's something that's a little different. But what we often have, I mean, a child that goes home and works in a second language, works in their first language, that was really their second language, you know, that's a situation. It's not going to happen often, but when it happens, we need to handle it. What I'm more concerned about, and what we see too much of, is this child was fluent. I mean, they tested fluent, strong proficiency in first grade. They've now gotten to 4th grade, and their teacher says, but they gotta go back in ESL because they don't know what they're doing. Well, the way the Department of Justice and OCR would look at this is if you have adequate teachers, and this child tested out as fluent and got the instruction that was differentiated to the extent he or she needed, they wouldn't have lost fluency if they've been in the same school. What you're talking about is a little different, but if they've been in the same school. So I've made a couple of gen ed teachers a little bit unhappy by saying, you have to make sure you're giving them what they need. Because if we, you get them fluent, you send them out into the world in the school, and then they don't get any differentiation, any special help, they don't get the support they need, they're going to lag behind. Is that your fault? Nope. Is it the child's fault? Nope. It's because we didn't have the instruction in place. So we've got to make sure that all the teachers are getting the support they need to give the students what they need. Nothing punitive about it, just skill building for all teachers.
You said something about the home language survey being filled out one time.
Shouldn't be filled out one time in a child's life. But that's the legal document. And Deborah has done something that I really like. She had a district. She's done many things, but this I really like. She has a district that sends out a package in enrollment, electronic package every year. She marked on her form, her home language survey, that and she knows from her data system if that child has had a home language survey, and they don't have to fill it in the second time. So she's got one clean copy.
What if they're encouraged to fill it out again, to mark a different
Who on
language?
earth would do that?
Somebody that's a State Department that doesn't want to take that child?
No, that's not a valid reason.
I mean, we have a child that filled it out 3 times, and they sat with
First
them
one's the only one that counts. First one's the only one that counts.
But they could choose not. Like in the example that was given of like the child is like starting to learn Spanish, the parent thinks it's cute to write Spanish on there. Like you can call them clarify.
You can call and clarify it. And if the parent says it was a mistake, that you need a procedure to do. But one, a child shouldn't be filling that out unless he or she is 18 or over. Okay? That's parents.
No, it was the parent.
Yeah. The first one's a legal document. And we're going to have to wrap up because we have to be somewhere else, but we'll be doing this in, well, I've got to be in the other meeting though.
Okay, somebody's coming back at 4 to do this again.
Oh yes, at 4, yeah. And now I know I thought you were telling me I had to talk 4 minutes.
So there's going to be another opportunity.
There's another opportunity